The key pillars that we want to look at are the same, I think, across all practices. And that is that you need to be sleeping, managing your stress to the degree that you can, have connection with other people. So having that sense of being part of a community. Connection with nature is very, very healing as well. If you are continually in an indoor environment, you're not getting any exposure to the natural world. And then movement is also an important one. I think that's important to bring up because people in our society really have internalized the message that like exercise is always good for you and you must do more of it. And that is not always the case, especially if you have an autoimmune disease.
Yes.
Especially if you have an autoimmune disease that you've been diagnosed with at a later point in your life and you are still trying to exercise the way that you had before.
Welcome to the Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast, the podcast for high achievers who want to stay sharp, focused, and full of energy despite their diagnosis. With your host, National Board Certified Functional Medicine Health Coach, Julie Michelson, where Julie helps you take your power back from autoimmunity. And now here's your host, Julie Michelson.
Welcome back to the Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast. I'm your host, Julie Michelson. And today I'm joined by Jamie Hartman. Jamie is a National Board Certified Health and Wellness Coach, a functional nutritional therapy practitioner, and a registered yoga teacher. She also has a master's degree in educational psychology and is a teacher and mentor of other health practitioners. Jamie is the owner of Gutsy by Nature, which she began in 2013 as a personal blog chronicling her experiences using dietary approaches, including an early version of the autoimmune protocol, to manage severe post-surgical Crohn's disease. Jamie believes in the power of food and lifestyle, and also in the power of professional collaboration, having experienced the benefits of both personally. She's edited and produced 2 community cookbooks devoted to recipes for the elimination phase of AIP, is the organizer and host of ongoing AIP Summit Series, and is co-facilitator of the AIP Certified Coach Practitioner Training Program. In today's conversation, we are talking about modified AIP, the new, less restrictive protocol that's easier to implement and can help you get even better results. So if you've considered the autoimmune protocol, but found it too restrictive, this episode is for you. Jamie, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Julie.
I am so excited for our conversation. I just had said to you before I hit record, in my head, I thought we already had recorded this conversation. So I'm just really genuinely thrilled about some of the new things going on with AIP and really educating the public about that. But first and foremost, can you share a bit of your journey with us? Because you are, or I would consider, a pioneer in the field of autoimmune wellness. And I think it's important for listeners to learn about you.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. My story, like so many of us, starts with my own health challenges. I have Crohn's disease. I was diagnosed when I was just 19, and I honestly coped with that diagnosis simply by trying to compartmentalize it into one slot in my life that didn't affect the rest of them. If I got through the day and hadn't embarrassed myself, I considered it a success. And that was really the end of it. And that worked, mostly ignoring it for about a decade, give or take, until it just stopped working completely. And I had to have surgery from the scar tissue that had developed over the many years of ignoring my symptoms. And after that surgery, there were some complications, and I had a very difficult time kind of coming back to baseline for that. And after a few more years after that, I finally realized I needed to try to acknowledge my symptoms in a way that incorporated maybe some lifestyle and some diet pieces. So I did some research, eventually stumbled upon a diet called the specific carbohydrate diet, SCD. I'm sure you're familiar with it. Probably some of your listeners are as well.
Yeah.
And it helped quite a bit, although I found that it seemed to kind of impact my mental health a lot. and started, continuing to look for other options. And again, stumbling along in the internet at that time, I found my way to what people were calling an autoimmune paleo or an autoimmune protocol approach. Switched things to that and immediately started to see even more improvement. And I think at that point, I thought I had it all figured out. Food is the answer. That's it. That's what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. I'm going to actually make it my career. I changed jobs. I went back to school. I became a nutritional therapy practitioner. And then I launched a business helping people to do the same thing. An interesting part of that, though, is that it was actually when I changed jobs and changed my lifestyle and I went from a job where I had very little control over my work environment and I was traveling a lot and didn't get consistent sleep and had a lot of stress, to one where I was working from home, working for myself, doing something I really loved, going to bed on a reasonable time every night, waking up in the same place every morning. That's when I actually saw my healing jump to an even higher level. And so at that point, I realized,
it's not just
at that point, I realized, okay, I was onto something when I thought, oh, food is the answer. I've got it all figured out. But I didn't even know how good I could feel until I made these lifestyle changes, which brings us all kind of to full circle that I realize now that food is very important, but my lifestyle was probably an even bigger factor for me. And that many of the things that I went through as I was trying to figure out what to do with my diet and make all these big changes and eliminate tons of foods, the lifestyle pieces needed to be managed as well. And it might have been an easier process for me if somehow I had known to adjust those earlier on, which is a huge part of what I do when I work with people. So that's my story in a nutshell.
which is amazing, because you already brought up in your own journey one of my biggest concerns / pet peeves with sometimes the preconceived notion about AIP. People think it's just food, and we're going to talk about the food piece for sure, because I think the new plan is really important for people to understand that sometimes you don't have to go full AIP, and really customizing and following the modified AIP can get great results, as we've seen in the studies. And we'll get into that piece, but I love that you bring up, because people are so resistant. They're like, just tell me what to eat. And I'm like, oh, we'll get to that later. So I love that was your experience almost accidentally, right? Like, yeah. It's huge. It's really huge. I can't even, for anybody listening, if you've been just focused on food, this isn't a really important conversation, although we're going to talk about food as well.
Absolutely.
Let's, in case I'm sure there are listeners that don't even know what AIP is. Let's start there, kind of, and then I really want to dig into the modified plan.
Yeah. So AIP stands for, depending on how you describe it, either autoimmune paleo or autoimmune protocol. I tend to default to using the term autoimmune protocol, but I want to acknowledge that the origin of it does come from the so-called paleo diet during that era, when that was kind of the new and different way of thinking about how we might eat more like our ancestors, cut out the industrial foods, cut out the the agricultural era foods, and just eat whole foods, mostly vegetables and meats and fish, and
healthy fats,
eliminating grains and many of those things. So that's where it started. And it is an outgrowth of that, recognizing that, well, there's a paradigm, a way of eating that was helpful for people wanting to lose weight, to, improve their body composition, to maybe improve their health and feel better, with some additional attention paid to additional eliminations. At that time was the focus primarily. It could also be very helpful for people with autoimmune disease. And so at the time that it originated amongst many different people, there's really no one person who has the absolute credit for creating it. The focus very much was on what foods do we need to cut out. It must work because we're cutting out foods. But I think that even early on, there was an awareness that when you're cutting out foods and you're still needing to eat, what you're eating, what is left is probably possibly what's driving the healing as much as what you're avoiding. And so it's important to acknowledge that it does come from that place of kind of restriction. And so the original AIP said to follow that paleo paradigm, which would be no grains, no legumes, and no dairy, no sugar. What else am I missing? I think that's pretty much it. Eating vegetables,
nuts, seeds.
Yeah. And then on top of that, the autoimmune element of it would say cut out nuts and seeds and nightshades and eggs. Those were the additional eliminations that were prescribed. And so many of us who started out using that early on, like myself, we were very focused on the eliminations,
avoiding what are we avoiding foods.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
And there wasn't really a lot of understanding at that time too, because it still was so new as to well, how long do you need to do this? Is this the way you need to eat for the rest of your life? If you reintroduce foods, are you setting yourself up to have a flare up of your disease at some point? Are you going to harm your health? We really didn't know yet. And so research had to be done and people had to have, experience using it in their practice. And we started to understand more and more about what really needs to be addressed in here and what maybe doesn't. So the original protocol starts there, and then reintroductions were always meant to be a part of it. But again, I think early on, we didn't quite know whether that was a good idea or not. And we've started to evolve on that.
Yeah. And as somebody who has experienced healing, it's the reintroductions are the most important part, by the way. You know that, I know that. I just want to share that.
I know that now, but we didn't know that then.
Well, and as somebody going through, who kind of self-created her own elimination way back when, as I hadn't heard of AIP, or any of the things I know now. Once you are feeling well, there's part of, you were saying, is it a good idea or not? But when you're feeling well, you're afraid to rock the boat.
Absolutely. Rocking the boat.
So
you don't want
to. And maybe, you do one reintroduction, it doesn't go well. You're like, oh, forget it. I'll just stay super, super restricted for the rest of my life. And that's not always ideal either. So, and I do think I too tend to use the word protocol, or sometimes I'll even use paleo and protocol, but because of the importance of the lifestyle stuff, that this is not a diet, this is not a, and that I love that you brought up the reintroductions, because I think I meet a lot of people that they stay in the elimination phase for years, and they think that that's what they should be doing. So I thank you for touching on that part for us. I want to touch on the studies, because for me, working in functional medicine, it's a funny thing. There aren't a lot of studies. And so there's resistance, right? The whole point is we want to bridge. I want everybody who goes to a GI doctor with the kinds of issues you were having, I want those doctors to talk about food, or even just ask, what are you eating? Do you sleep? Crazy stuff. And so it's tough to bridge without studies. So let's talk a little bit about the studies that have gone on in the past few years, because for me, that's been really exciting. I know it works. I see it all the time. But it's nice to be able to show people, okay, you wanted a scientific study, here you go.
Yeah, there have been some studies done. What's exciting about the studies, and I can tell you that, and tell your listeners that they've been done on a couple specific diseases, because you have to have some kind of criteria for who's going to be in your study group. So the first one was an IBD focused study, so Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis. And then the second one that we have consulted on was one with people who had a diagnosis of Hashimoto's thyroiditis. But that said, because people often know, well, is it going to work for my condition? We haven't studied every single condition out there, true, but we can extrapolate a lot from that. And in these studies, what has been done is that the study participants were not just given the diet. They weren't just told, here's your list of foods, or here are your meals prepared for you, or, any of that. It was, let's gradually transition your diet from wherever you are currently and provide you with a lot of support along the way. So they were working with a coach, qualified AIP certified coach, and medical professionals along the way. And each week they were instructed to examine their current diet and remove and add every single week. And the beautiful thing about that was that the end results showed us, when they started doing testing along the way throughout that process, that the people that were going to see results were already seeing it before they'd even completed that full elimination, which tells us that the intuition a lot of us had earlier, that maybe we didn't need to be this restricted, was correct.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is so exciting, right? Because then I do have a lot of clients who come in and they just want to jump to full elimination. And a few years ago, I was feeling them out for what works better for them, right? And now I really do encourage people to work towards, so that they're not avoiding stuff they don't have to be avoiding. And I think it's so fun. And I want to just second what you said about, these studies were for particular, because that's how you have to do a study.
Right.
And and I know from working with all kinds of autoimmunity that the approach, like you said, if it's going to work, is going to work, regardless of diagnosis, because the diagnosis is, I don't want to say doesn't matter in that sense, but it's the same. The process is the same. It's just how is it showing up in the body? And so healing, healing is healing. I love that. So let's talk about the difference. We're less restrictive now. If you choose to do the modified plan. What are the big foods then? What are what's included on or excluded, I guess, on the modified plan?
Yes. So again, think about what a person's going to eat when they're following AIP, whether they're doing the original one that, I started out in, or the modified protocol. Is going to be a lot of variety of vegetables, fruits, healthy meats, fish. These are still going to be the core of what they're going to hopefully be filling their plate and their meals with, because that's where we know they're going to get lots of healing power. What are you going to exclude during the elimination phase? And again, remembering, even before I start to describe this for all your listeners, that this is still temporary. We're still going to have reintroductions at some point here.
It's
but
a phase.
For the start, for the elimination phase, which you're following the modified AIP plan, you're going to be eliminating the cereal grains. So that's going to eliminate anything that contains gluten, but also the other grains like corn and oats. And there's one exception in there. If you feel like you are going to do well with rice, maybe if somebody who has higher energy needs, or it's a culturally important food for them, we know that rice is really pretty low in terms of that reactivity scale, so they could include rice. But other than that, all the big cereal grains are going to be excluded to start with. Also dairy. So that whole category of dairy would be excluded to start with. One exception there would be that if somebody felt like they would do well, again, if it's culturally important to them, perhaps they could use ghee as part of one of their healthy fats that they include. That's an option. You could decide one way or the other on that, see how your body does with it. And then you're going to exclude nightshades. That's a category of vegetables and fruits that is pretty broad, and it includes the big ones that most people eat in their diet are tomatoes, potatoes, peppers, also eggplants. Ashwagandha is a nightshade, and that's an interesting one for people who work in functional medicine, because a lot of folks, are taking it as a supplement. And when you're going to do the AIP protocol, you'd want to be looking for an alternative to that if your practitioner didn't think that the benefit of it outweighed the potential for reactivity to it. And then common allergens. So with that category, we would exclude soy, we would exclude nuts, we would exclude peanuts and eggs. So that leaves somebody still to be able to consume. The big difference between the modified AIP and the AIP, that kind of AIP classic, we're calling it core
classic,
AIP now,
I love it,
is going to be one of the biggest areas are going to be legumes. So
Yes.
if you're following the modified AIP, you would still be encouraged to consume those good fiber rich foods like lentils, chickpeas, other legumes. They can be really helpful for budget reasons, as well as providing some nutrients that are much needed for people. And
And
also seeds are
snacks.
no longer excluded. Yeah. Seeds are the other big category that's not excluded in the modified AIP, but is
Yeah.
excluded in the core AIP. And that opens up the door now for people who get really excited to hear this
Yes.
news if they've
Yes.
heard about AIP before and they said, I can't do that because it says I have to give up my coffee and my
Coffee.
chocolate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Coffee, chocolate, pepper.
Which
Those
we've
are
always
big.
historically excluded because those are seeds. People don't
Right.
think of them as seeds, but they actually are.
Right.
Well, our understanding now that we've learned over the years of using this and the research is that those are not big immune triggers for people. And so
Yeah.
there might be other reasons that you would avoid or eliminate or reduce your coffee or your chocolate intake, but not because they're seeds anymore.
Right.
So it becomes much more personalized.
Yeah. Which is wonderful because I love, it is true. Don't mess with people's coffee. If you're a coffee drinker.
Yeah.
But coffee is one of those things. It is always worth experimenting with for different reasons, like you said, not necessarily an immune trigger, but definitely can be
Right.
troublesome for people, even if they don't want to admit it. So, but often, if you're moving to even modified AIP, if you're somebody who drinks your coffee light and sweet, we're going to mess with your coffee anyway. So
Yes, we are.
yeah, yep. And so you may want to pause the coffee, but now you're in the driver's seat a little bit more, which is lovely, I think.
Mhm.
I don't know, it really anything we can do, that empowerment and really just learning to listen to our body, I think is important. With that being said, how does one determine, like, okay, should I do modified? Should I do classic? Should I start modified if that's not working? Move on? Like, what is
Yeah.
your approach that you're sharing with people?
Yeah, for the vast majority of people, the modified AIP protocol is the place to start.
Okay.
That really is what our best practices and our evidence and our understanding of the research is saying, that for the vast majority of people, that's the place to start. Obviously, if you have known food allergies or sensitivities, you continue to avoid those things. That should go
Correct.
without saying, but I think it's worth saying,
Yeah,
again,
always.
because it's important. And then the guidance is the same, that you're going to plan on following the elimination phase for a minimum of 30 days. If you start feeling better even sooner, that's great, but we still like you to stick it out for 30 days so you're going to get that really kind of optimal feeling of wellness. And you might extend that out to perhaps up to 90 days before you start thinking about reintroductions. And reintroductions begin when you are starting to see some measurable improvement in your symptoms.
Yeah.
Not waiting until you never have a bad day,
Till it's
or waiting until
perfect.
you have zero symptoms and everything's perfect and you're in complete remission. Because let's be honest, that's not really life. There are other factors involved in life. But once you're feeling like things are in the right direction, measurable improvement in your symptoms, it's now time to start thinking about testing some of those excluded foods, because you don't need to avoid all of them forever in order to feel your best.
Wait, say that one more time.
Yeah.
You
You
don't.
don't.
You really don't. I promise. We're both here with personal and professional experience. It doesn't need to be lifelong. And what about the people that which I think will lead perfectly, kind of circle back to my pet peeve. The people that are like, I have done, classic full AIP elimination. I've been doing it for 2 years and I really still don't feel better.
Yeah.
What are they
Yeah. Then
missing?
something else is going
Yeah.
on. And
Right.
what it could be is a huge array of things. It may be diet related. It may be that you're not missing something,
Yeah.
there's some deficiency in your diet, but it also very likely could be some kind of a lifestyle factor, where we want to make sure we're paying attention to those. The
Yeah.
key pillars that we want to look at are the same, I think, across all practices. And that is that you need to be sleeping. You need to be, managing your stress to the degree that you can. You need to have connection with other people. So having that sense of being part of a community. Connection with nature is very, very healing as well. If you are continually in an indoor environment, you're not getting any, exposure to the natural world, that may be hindering your progress. And then movement is also an important one. I think that's important to bring up because people in our society really have internalized the message that like exercise is always good for you and you must do more of it. And that is not always the case, especially if you have an autoimmune disease.
Yes.
Especially if you have an autoimmune disease that you've been diagnosed with at a later point in your life and you are still trying to exercise the way that you had before.
That was me, although not even later in life. I was early 30s, but it was, and I see this, I'm sure you see this all the time too. It's like, it's the one, I'm not going to give this piece up to my disease, my diagnosis, my whatever. And not realizing that we are just driving inflammation by over exercising with autoimmunity. I mean, it's really common.
It is.
Yeah.
It's something I see a lot in my practice because I do get a lot of those people like you just described come to me and say, I've been doing AIP for 2 years and I'm not feeling better. And I heard you're the expert on AIP and I want you to tell me what else do I need to eliminate?
Yeah, I'm a triathlete and AIP is not working. It's like,
yeah. Yeah. So there are definitely a lot of other things to look at. And then of course, I don't want to exclude also the possibility that there could be something that needs some medical attention, whether it's from a conventional doctor or a functional medicine doctor or some other kind of practitioner. We can't neglect to consider that is part of it. It is important to use all of those tools.
Right.
I talked about my story briefly and how I tried to ignore my symptoms and I didn't ignore them. And then another piece of that is that I had medical care. And I had to find the medication that worked the best for me. Having no medication didn't work. Medication without any diet and lifestyle attention didn't work. And I needed to have the right medication and the right attention to diet and lifestyle. So I think that's important too to acknowledge.
It is so important. And it's never, I mean, we've been saying it in all kinds of different ways, but it's never one thing. It's not just diet. I have a client actually with ulcerative colitis who, his doctors told him, which is true, not the way they meant it, but it's true. You didn't eat your way into this disease. You're not going to eat your way out of this disease. To a point, yes. I'm like, no, the food isn't what isn't, here's the one cause, right? It's not gluten. It's not. It's a piece of the puzzle and we're whole humans. And so, and circling back to that's why I use the word protocol because we need optimized sleep on consistent schedules. We need the right movement, not sitting on the couch all day and not over exercising and driving inflammation. We need to be managing toxins. We need all of that. And so I love that you brought up, don't discount medical support. It's part of it. It's all part of it. And the relationships, I mean, what went on, in the early 2020s, it just drove numbers. People were disconnected. People weren't, hugging and touching and so it's all really, really important. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, just to add on to the point about everything being important, it's also important to remember that what your vision of success with your health is going to vary. And so many people come into something like AIP thinking that there's like one clear outcome that they're aiming for, and that might be full remission, or it might be getting off all their medications. And that is potentially what's going to happen, perhaps.
Right.
But the real question to ask yourself is, what is it for? What is the purpose of this? What is your what is your best health going to give you, and why do you want it so badly? Keep that in mind and accept that it's not going to be like a perfect, like, it's not like going to your doctor and getting a perfect report card. That's not success.
Right.
That's just their view of it. Success is that you're doing the things in your life that you want,
Yeah.
whatever that might mean.
Yeah. I love that you said that, because that is what you need to know your why for healing anyway. And I love that you mentioned people come to me all the time, they'll hear my story and they're like, I want to get off my meds. And I'm like,
Mhm.
wait, don't you want life to be bigger again? Don't you want to feel well? Like, let's start there. And then, like you said, yeah, often that's what happens as we heal. Right. But
Yeah.
to me, that's not the target. Or
Mhm.
I know I've interviewed people who think, I take thyroid hormone. And I'm happy to do, my antibodies are normal, everything is great, but yeah, I take a little thyroid glandular,
Well, I mean,
and to
let's say,
me, that's not a failure. That doesn't mean I haven't
absolutely.
healed. It just means, okay, so that part, like, I still needed that little bit of help, and oh my
Yeah,
gosh, I will fight you in an alley for my thyroid hormone. Like, I'll give you my
absolutely.
wallet, but you're not taking my empty
Yeah.
thyroid. So,
I mean, you
um,
think about it, if you had lost like the function in, like, say, your right foot,
right.
for some reason, like it wasn't
Yeah.
working, like how your
Right.
thyroid's not working perfectly,
Right.
would you like say it's only success if I can move without crutches?
Right.
Like, of course
No.
not.
Yeah.
You
I
would
know.
you would use the crutches. You would be excited that you have some, well, I don't know if you'd be
A way to
excited,
get
but
around.
we'd celebrate it that you have a way to experience life and
You're
move
right.
around. And it's the same thing.
Yeah.
If you have had a medical condition develop, and there's medication that treats it that will help you have a greater life,
Right.
then that's something that's valid to
It-
use. And it is certainly not a sign of failure or success one way or the other,
no.
whether you're using it or not.
That right. And so I love that I think that's an amazing place for people to start, is to, and I know you do that when you work with people. I do that when I work with people, but for anybody listening, even if you're not working with anybody, really take some time, and what's your why? Start there, because that's going to help you. That's going to give you that motivation to continue whatever path, whether it's modified AIP, whatever it is that you're going to decide to go after for healing. Because there are hard days, and like you said, it's not magic. Where okay, I'm avoiding these foods and I'm eating more veggies and bringing in good things, and I had 3 good days and then a bad day again. Like, healing is not linear. It never
No.
is. Yeah. And it does. So I think it's so important to consider your motivators. And if you are somebody who would have maybe a few minutes ago checked the box of, well, if my doctors told me I no longer had whatever, reconsider about, like, your day to day. What is it that you really want?
Well
Love
said.
that. I love that. Um, we probably already touched on it, but I just want to, I have mentioned I have some, pet peeves about AIP perception out in the public. What is it that you would like either for people to know, or for people to let go of, that they think is, AIP in their mind?
Yeah, I think there's so many, and we have touched on a lot of them, I think, in the course of our conversation. Probably the biggest one that comes to my mind right away is this idea that you have to be absolutely perfect, or why bother? I think I really think that's a pervasive myth out there. And it's true, you really can't have like a cheat day on AIP and expect it to be very helpful
Can't do
for
it
you,
6 days a week. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if every few days or once a week you're exposing yourself to something that is triggering your autoimmune disease, that's going to be a problem. But that is not the same thing as just living your life. And you don't have to be 100% perfect at all times for this to be beneficial. If you have a slip up, something goes wrong, you don't have to think about it as starting over. You didn't undo all the good work that you did
Yeah.
before. It has tremendous healing power when you keep it in perspective. I think that the impact of beating yourself up for slip ups or having so much stress and anxiety about being perfect all the time is going to negate the benefit that you would get from having a calmer attitude about it and giving yourself some grace. That's tremendously important as well.
I love that. Grace is a word I wasn't part of my everyday vocabulary until I started coaching specifically autoimmune clients, because I feel like it's part of it. And I'm not even just talking about AIP. I'm talking about life. When we don't give ourselves grace in life,
And
we
it's
end
so,
up.
so yeah, it's so common, I think, when we're thinking about an autoimmune disease too, because we've been told autoimmune disease is your body attacking itself.
Right. Yeah.
And so we're already feeling like it's our fault or our body's
Right.
fault, and it's not a really very helpful paradigm. I think it's much better to think of it in terms of your immune system is misfiring. It's not
Right.
your immune system's trying to protect you. It's always trying to protect you.
Yeah.
But there's a communication mistake. It's like calling, for help, calling 911, and they send everything that they need when all you really needed was, some assistance. You didn't need the firefighter to,
Right.
start the fire, knock down the wall, and do all that kind of stuff. But it was a miscommunication. And that's what's happening with our immune system when we have an autoimmune disease. So our body's trying to help you. It's
Right.
not attacking, it's trying to help. It's just miscommunicating.
I love that. I usually, I'll say, it's like the troops are exhausted and they're just not very precise. But
Mhm.
it is difficult in the beginning, at least, especially the way people are. I don't even want to use the word educated. The things that they're told, if they're typically when they're diagnosed, even still. I mean, even
Mhm.
still now, it's really common for somebody with ulcerative colitis or Crohn's to be told it doesn't matter what you eat. So we still have some work to do. We'll continue having these conversations. But your symptoms really, really are communication. And
Yeah.
we don't want to listen. We ignore the aches and pains. We ignore the fact that we may have to run to the bathroom. We ignore the fact that I have one client who just normalized that she would not leave the house until 11 o'clock in the morning because she knew she shouldn't.
Yeah.
And that just became like her okay part of her routine. Um, and so instead of listening as in, oh, my body's giving me information, we ignore until then we have the miscommunication going on. So I like that word. There's a lot of grace in that word, miscommunication.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah,
um,
because you don't blame anybody for miscommunication if it was honest, like
right?
I didn't understand what you were saying.
Yeah,
We forgive that, we accept that. So have
yeah.
that attitude to your body as well.
I love that. Oh, so amazing. I have like 852 other questions for you. Um, but I will honor your time and listeners' time as well. So I'm going to ask my wrap-up question, which is, and you can answer it, doesn't even have to be AIP related. What is one step that listeners can take? Because you already gave us so many good ones, starting today to improve their health.
Oh, wow. That's really, I think
Tough
the
one.
first thing they can do today is get outside.
Yes.
Just and get in, people will call it, many things officially call it grounding, but you don't even have to think of it that way.
Take
Just
your shoes
somehow
off.
get your feet, your hands on the earth.
Love it.
If the weather is not really all that conducive to it, you can make that time in nature very brief, or you can maybe
Right.
find a way to bring it in, or just look at a picture if you have to, but find some connection to nature. It's very healing, very powerful.
I'm so glad you said that. That's like, I knew whatever you were going to say was going to be impactful, but I love that you pulled that one in. I literally ran in right before we hopped on camera to, because I was standing outside barefoot because I could. So
Yeah.
love that. Love that. We had just planted our garden last week, which might have been a gamble. It was a week, 2 weeks early, but so I was tending barefoot. So love it. Amazing. Jamie, for people listening on the go like I do, and they may not be willing to click those show notes, where is the best place for people to find you?
Well, you can find information about me personally at my website, Gutsy by Nature. That was the blog that I started way back at the beginning of that story when I first decided to change my diet and start keeping track of what I was eating. And then you can also find me and all the things that I'm doing with the other AIP certified coaches at aipsummit.com. And that's a great place to start if you're AIP curious at all. Check that out.
Yes. And I have to throw this one out there for people, because there's always a transition when, when we're entertaining the idea of, okay, am I going to do the AIP elimination, whether it's modified? I always, just like you were talking about, bringing in the good foods as you're taking out the foods that you need to be temporarily avoiding. I always tell people, find new recipes. Jamie has amazing recipes. So go to Gutsy by Nature as well. And then also go to AIP Summit, because there's just so much information on there. I'm blessed to be part of that community. It's really making an impact. So
and we're blessed to have you, Julie.
Well,
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all of the amazing gold that you gave us today. And I cannot encourage people enough to, dig in. If you're AIP curious, Jamie's your go-to. So check out those sites.
Thank you, Julie.
For everyone listening, remember you can get those transcripts and show notes by visiting inspiredliving.show. I hope you had a great time and enjoyed this episode as much as I did. I'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to Julie Michelson's Inspired Living with Autoimmunity. Did you enjoy this episode? Please like, share, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to get a transcript of this and every other episode, just head on over to inspiredliving.show or click on the link in this episode's description. There, you can also find everything we discussed in this episode, including links and information about our guest. You can even send in your questions to be answered by Julie in a future episode. That's inspiredliving.show. Until next time, this is Julie Michelson's Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast, helping you take your power back.